Hi, so in this video, what I'm going to do is talk about the patch 7.1 guide that I just brought out, or guide update more specifically, for the Retribution Paladin. What I wanted to do was talk about some of the things that are and are not coming in 7.1 and to discuss the way I did the update. So, the reason for this, it might sound strange. Anything you've got to say about patch 7.1 surely could go in the 7.1 update. Well, here's the thing. As soon as I uploaded that update, and I knew exactly what would happen, this is not a reaction video to that. I was already planning on doing this. At one time, I was even thinking about doing this video before I brought out that guide. But I've done it afterwards. So a question immediately came up, what about the changes to Crusade? And I sort of answered that, and then a few minutes later, the same question came up. And this is understandable, because when I talked about patch 7.1, when the patch notes first came out a few weeks ago, I was not a happy bunny, and one of the things I was not a happy bunny about was very much about the Crusade changes. Now, first of all, there aren't any Crusade changes. That is because Blizzard have reverted the change. Now, first of all, what I really need to say is this is a really good example of what I was hoping would have happened earlier on in the alpha of Legion to begin with. No one really liked the Crusade change that was proposed. So what was proposed, first of all, before I explain why it was reverted? The current situation is that Crusade, instead of Avenging Wrath giving us 35% increased damage, Crusade gives us 3.5% increased damage and haste, but it goes up by a stack each time we spend a holy power point. So we spend 3 on Templar's Verdict, it goes up 3 stacks, and it goes up to potentially 15 stacks. And, you know, people like this. A lot of people like this. I'm a bit indifferent to it, I have to say, because you get to the point, especially during heroism, where you just got too much haste. You just straight up too much haste. So it could do with being reworked, and Blizzard do want to rework it. But a lot of people like it. What it was being changed to, no one really liked. Well, some people must have liked it because the change was going to be done. And they were going to change it. Instead of it increasing your haste, it was still going to increase your damage per stack but this time by 3%. But the number doesn't really matter. That's just a tuning issue. But the other effect it was going to have was you were going to massively reduce the cooldown on Judgment by 75%, in fact. So the cooldown on your Judgment would be like just over 2 seconds, depends on how much haste you've got. So you would be hitting Judgment pretty much every second ability. The other thing it did was make Judgment generate a holy power. So it was a holy power builder. Now, people didn't like this idea. It created a lot of thorny issues. And here are some of them. I think what it might have been was a device to try and increase the value of Mastery, because Mastery, of course, very much plays with Judgment. So if you're using Judgment more often, you're sort of getting a bit more effect from Mastery. But there were a large number of problems with it, not least of which you potentially created a situation where Greater Judgment, which is, you look at it, sort of an AoE talent that is not necessarily dreadful in single target, it's clearly not the single target choice, actually could easily become the choice to take. Single target AoE doesn't really matter. And there were an awful lot of other problems with it as well, of which I'd already prepared a video explaining, but don't now need to upload because it doesn't matter. Because these same concerns were explained on the forums multiple times, and most importantly on the US patch 7.1 feedback forums. There were multiple posts, and I don't just mean multiple posts of people going, I don't like this, change it, and just, you know, without reason. People actually coming up with proper arguments with it. The theory crafters put in a lot, as soon as this change was announced, you could just see it by sight, it was not good. The theory crafters put in a lot of work to quickly be able to model this, to produce sims that showed that this was not going to be good. You know, the consequence were really far-reaching. As I say, I don't really want to bore you with those details now because it's not going to happen. But this was a huge, huge thorny issue. You wouldn't believe what this was going to do to us. And, you know, apart from anything else, all the sort of stats you've been working towards and the trinkets and all the rest of it would overnight disappear. The very real probability was going to be that you're there on the last raid of this reset, doing pretty well, you know, doing decent damage, blah, blah, blah. The very next reset, the vast majority of people who are caught completely unaware by it would all of a sudden not know how to play their class. It was that far-reaching. One talent change would be that far-reaching. So there was a lot of arguments against this on the forums. And as I say, yes, you get your same ones that just go, I don't like it. But there were a lot of people actually setting out the arguments and doing it in a really detailed way. And it was absolutely, not unfortunately me, I can't post on US forums. And really, there's no point in posting on EU forums. But Blizzard responded, and thumbs up to them as well, because they've actually said, okay, what we're going to do is revert the change. We still want to do something with Crusade. We still want to change it, but not yet. It's not going to happen in patch 7.1, they've said. So, yeah. So hopefully you see now what the need for this video is. It wouldn't be sensible to explain all this in the guide because I'm talking about something that's not happening. But I have to say this is a real thumbs up for both the community who have behaved in a positive way here and for Blizzard who have actually taken that feedback on board. And now I can draw back to the point I originally made back in sort of January, February time in Alpha Legion, when there were a couple of other things that we're still to date not that happy about, such as greater blessings, such as the very nature of this judgment debuff in the first place, where it sort of shows what might have happened if the community had responded in this equally positive manner at the time. And I think what the problem was then is now everyone can experience it. Any Retribution Paladin could have tried this out on PTR, and not me, unfortunately. You'll notice there's no PTR footage in there, because every time I go on it disconnects me. Great, thanks. But a lot of other people have been able to get on there and try things out. And so that's probably why the volume of feedback has come from. Whereas in Alpha Legion, because it's only the alpha tester that can try it for themselves, a lot of people, you will get some people posting on forums about things they don't like, but usually these are people who are just reading the stuff and coming to their own conclusions without trying it. Very rarely is it people who are actually following someone who's testing it for themselves and having a discussion with them and then coming out with it. But we could have had greater blessings, I think, change for the better if far more people had have come out with that. So all I would say with this one as a lesson is, if people can, next time the expansion comes out, the next expansion that is, and we've got early testing, even before you get in, take part in the community discussions, really get involved, because it does show that Blizzard will respond to feedback, as long as they can't say, oh, well, it's only a handful of people that are against it. As long as they're not able to say that, then they respond. They've responded, absolutely. Now, in terms of the general organisation of the guys, so why an update? Because what I was originally looking like, just a week ago, what it was looking like I was going to have to do was completely redo my Essentials Guide. The Essentials Guide that I have, I was always very well aware of this. You do a guide on a website, and when things change, you can update it. So example, Fardion, for example, who does the Icy Veins guide, who sort of follows this channel. Rebdul, who is a Retribution Paladin raid leader, who maintains the Wowhead guide. Because they're on websites, if there's anything changes, they can update those changes pretty quickly. When it's on YouTube, it's a different matter. I can't just make a new video and then overwrite an existing one. That can't happen. We can't do that. We have to put a new one out there. But people will still see the old one unless I delete it. And of course, I'm not going to delete it. It's stats and everything, it's views and blimey. So that's why when I was planning to do these things for Legion, I wanted to think very, very carefully about how I structured it. And what I said is, okay, what I'll do is I'll do the overall guide. If anything changes, then I'll do an addendum that just covers those changes. If there then becomes a point where there's too many changes, where a lot of the Essentials Guide is incorrect, I'm just going to have to redo the Essentials Guide. And I was expecting to have to do that no more than once a patch, thank goodness. But it looks like in 7.1 I won't have to redo it, because the only changes from the Essentials Guide now are effectively this Blade of Wrath. Sort of the Cavalier thing as well, because the Divine Steed became a core ability after I did that, I think. But I'm not sure, actually. Can't remember. But certainly Blade of Wrath is now the only change. When it was going to be Crusade, even though you'd say, well, that's still only 2 changes, the Crusade change was so far-reaching that actually I was going to have... because it didn't just affect what I was talking about with that talent, it also affected DPS rotations and stat priorities and everything. Everything changed. Which is really how far-reaching it was. So that's not now the case, I'm pleased to say, because it is a benefit if I can keep that Essentials Guide relevant for as long as possible. I deliberately wrote it to take account of potentially future changes. So, for example, in it, I talked about the fact that as soon as you've got traits in your Ashbringer, that it's, in all likelihood, Execution Sentence was not going to be a single target increase unless it changed. That hasn't happened, so I haven't really had to elaborate on that. I didn't even mention Execution Sentence in the update guide because nothing's changed. Don't use it. And the reason for that is I know that if I were to have to redo that guide and even take the old Essentials Guide off the playlist, people would still find it, because I've still had very recently a comment put on a video that I did specifically for the pre-Legion patch, which is now no longer relevant. It's off the playlist. It's not in the playlist anymore. But people can still come across it. People can still find it. And so they're watching that. And even though I've tried to explain in it that this is for the pre-Legion patch, and I distinctly remember at the beginning of that video I said, if Legion has already launched, this is not the guide for you. You need to click on the playlist. I've put a link to it. Go and find the stuff there. So people, if you can remember that, the playlist is always up to date. I have just pruned some videos out of the playlist just today. I've got rid of a few that are not now relevant. But yeah, great. It doesn't count the Essentials Guide. I want to keep that relevant for as long as possible. Now, in terms of 7.1, of course, there will have to be some more guides coming out. There will have to be another Trinkets guide at some point. But it's really tricky. It's very it's one of the types of thing you can't really do ahead of time. I can talk about the trinkets that are in Karazhan and Trials of Valor, which look a bit tasty actually, and Nighthold, but only really hypothetically. They've not been tested to any great extent. Blizzard have not allowed us to test them. Unlike with the legendaries in beta, they never allowed us to, for example, test the tier sets, the tier 19 sets, or the trinkets from these dungeons. And they, because you can't always read from the tooltip exactly how they're supposed to work. We don't know. So it needs a lot of testing in order for them to be modelled accurately in Simulation Craft. And of course, people like me need something like Simulation Craft in order to be able to say which trinket's better than which. Because we can look at the tooltip, like a lot of people can, and draw spurious conclusions. But without hard data, you can't really say anything for certain. I mean, it's a bit like I was reading on the MMO Champion forum and someone was trying to argue that Mastery was actually a really good stat. Never mind well, it is a good stat. I've already explained this. But in terms of he was trying to explain that's our best stat, and he was going, never mind what the Sims say. Mastery is our best stat because if you think about it, you look at your damage, Templar's Verdict's your way majority of your damage, and Mastery buffs your Templar's Verdict, so therefore Mastery, never mind what the Sims say, should actually be better. Forgetting the fact that crit and versatility, as well as haste, also increase your Templar's Verdict damage. But and that's the problem that can go wrong when you just try and empirically decide which things are better. You can't do it. You cannot do it accurately. And there'll be any number of people who will put guides out there or just advice who will do that and make it sound convincing, but it ain't accurate. And I won't put stuff out until I am reasonably... I could still be wrong, but I at least like to give myself a very good chance of not being wrong before I put something out there. So there will be a delay on that. And speaking of tier sets, of course, at some point we're going to have to discuss that. I'm still hoping they will change that. I have not talked about the tier set bonuses as yet in any guides because I'm still hoping for changes on them. And again, we haven't been able to test them. We cannot say for certain exactly how they work. You can sort of imagine how they're supposed to work by looking at the tooltip. Is it exactly how they actually work? Without being able to try them on, we don't know. So until we get to try them in PTR, no idea. The other big thing, of course, will be something else that a lot of people want to know that's fallen away a lot in Legion, because Blizzard themselves said, I've already discussed this in one of my other vlogs, they're not happy that item level is not a good indication of gear. A lot of the rhetoric they used long before Legion came out was they wanted item level to be the way you told whether a piece of gear was an upgrade or not. They sort of understood random sockets, you know, muddies the water a little bit. But generally speaking, they wanted you to be able to see that this item is an upgrade because you know what? It's higher item level. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is the expansion where item level as an arbiter of an upgrade or not is the worst indicator. This is worse than any expansion yet. The expansion where they said they really want this to be the case, worst ever. And they acknowledge this. They know that this isn't the case and they're not happy with it. Whether they will make any changes, I don't know. What they might be doing is thinking to themselves, the way secondary stats works in Legion, the problem might ease itself a little bit later on anyway. Now, I did a video some time ago explain about secondary stats. And remember, unlike in other expansions, as we get through the expansion, we get higher and higher item level gear and we push past the item level 900 gear, the budget for secondary stats will fall away compared with primary stats. This is a deliberate ploy to prevent people being able to overload on extremely high levels of a particular secondary stat and therefore get very game-changing benefits from it. You know, warriors and mages in particular have completely changed from start of an expansion to the end just by loading up on particular stats like crit, getting 100% in a particular secondary stat. They don't want that happening. So, you know, the amount of secondary stat increases on item level will be less than it. For secondary stats will be less. For primary stats it won't. Which might mean that item level starts to become a better indicator of an upgrade without Blizzard having to do anything in particular once we go another half year down the line or a year down the line. I don't know. Maybe they don't know. Maybe that's what we're waiting on. Maybe that's not. Maybe they've just got to go back to the drawing board and think, how can we change the system without completely... Because what they don't want to do, they're not stupid people. They don't want to completely monkey about with a system, especially one that affects everyone. Because if you get to a situation where someone's sitting pretty, oh, I've got some really good gear, I've been prioritising this stat, it took me a while to get it, but I'm in a good place now. And then a patch comes out and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, this is all crud. This is the worst gear imaginable. What am I going to do now? They obviously don't want that situation. Which again is why I say thanks for Blizzard for listening to the feedback from Retribution Paladins regarding Crusade, because that's exactly what Crusade was going to do to us. It was in itself a nerf. I mean, Crusade was so bad. I'm going to keep going back to it because it's the big thing to talk about in this video. It was so much of a nerf that in its intended state, it was actually no better than not taking a talent at all. So inevitably, we wouldn't have taken Crusade. We would have taken Divine Purpose or Horror of Horrors, Holy Wrath. I've actually got the Legendary Braces now. I sort of seriously could have used Holy Wrath. Scared the shit out of my healers. That would have been funny. So hopefully that sort of explains why I've done the guide as I did. And remember, this is just a vlog. One last little point just at the end here. I've already mentioned this in a video before. I'm going to mention it in another couple of videos over the next week, just to highlight to people. Next Saturday, so a week today, if you're watching this when it's straight away come out, but of course you may not be. But Saturday, let me see, the 29th of October at 7 PM UK time, I am going to do another live Retribution Q&A on Twitch. Now, for those people who are not familiar with these, maybe you're new to the channel, or maybe you've just found this video and you're not even subscribed to the channel. What we do in these, I've been doing these now, I've done a few of these. I did a few before Legion even came out, and I've done a couple since it came out. And they're very popular. We get a lot of Retribution Paladins on them, having a good old conversation about various things. And what I do is, people ask me questions through the channel. Sometimes I can't really give a detailed response in a reply. It's much better to show something. So I save up some of these questions to talk about on the channel. Of course, people can discuss things live as well. If you want to see what it's like, you can click on the playlist. I've got a link to the playlist for the Retribution Paladin guides. The last two currently are in there. As they sort of get old, I sort of replace them with the newer ones. So if you want to see what sort of things, how it goes, you can see in there. It does go on for significantly over an hour. I don't put a timer on it as such. Usually I just sort of stop it when it winds down. The last couple, that's tended to be round about the hour and a half, hour and 3/4 mark. But as long as it doesn't go over 2 hours, then I'm happy for it to go on as long as it needs. It might only go for an hour, it might go for longer, who knows. So what I'm saying is, if you're a little bit late, you can't quite make it at that time, but half an hour later you can, then, you know, you can still, you know, go on, you go onto Twitch. The details I'm going to put somewhere, but as I say, I will put a specific video reminding people near the time as well. If you follow me on Twitter, then I'll be talking about it on Twitter throughout the week as well. And yeah, so if you can join me, then great. If you can't join me, because of course I can't, you know, there is no time when it's suitable for everyone around the world. I try and pick a time that is reasonably suitable for people in the European time zones and the American time zones, and maybe some others, but it doesn't suit everyone. And if it can't suit you, then I do also upload it to YouTube, so you will be able to see later. And if you know you're not going to be able to make it, or you just don't want to make it, you can still submit questions to me and I'll bring them up on there, and then you can watch the YouTube video after for the response and what other people have had to say about it. The reason I'm bringing it out next Saturday as well, just as an explanation as opposed to today, is because if I were to have done it today, just before the patch comes out, because I did one, for example, just before Legion came out, which is good in some ways and not so good in others. It's good in some ways because there's a lot of buzz about it, you get a lot of interesting discussions going on, but the downside is that it's hypothetical questions. A lot of people have not been able to try these things out for themselves, whereas next Saturday, the patch will have been out for a few days, people will have done a bit of raiding or dungeons or whatever else they're doing. There's not huge changes to us, of course, but, you know, people will have actually tried it live, so then the actual questions are no longer hypothetical. It's actually, okay, this situation has arisen. I can guess what question number 1 will be, and answer number 1 will be Simit. Yeah, question number 1 will be, which is Blade of Wrath better than it was or not so good? Simit. You can't just now, though. I'll have to actually, I don't actually know if, there must be a version of Simulation Craft that has the 7.1 version of Blade of Wrath in it, because I know. But how soon it's going to become the main... I'll have to have a look at that myself. But certainly by the time it comes out, then we'll have access to that as well. So hopefully you've found that interesting. Hopefully it's answered a few questions that may have arisen from why I didn't just completely redo the Essentials Guide, why I've done the update guide as I did, and why I didn't talk about changes to Crusade, because there aren't any. And if you've enjoyed it and you found it useful, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share with other people. And until next time, I'll see you later.